love now and
Did you
always.
I love you?
Love was stronger than anything.
I feel in love.
And I love you more than anything.
There's still love.
From the New York Times, I'm Anna Martin. This is Modern Love. Today on the show, we have a story about how sometimes a family is held together by untruths. These aren't necessarily outright lies, but they're evasions. They're avoidances. They're these silences that cover something up. The essay is written by David Califf. In his family, the untruth was about how David is gay and very happily married to a man. David's whole family kept this a secret from his grandmother. His essay is called The House Where My Husband Doesn't Exist, and it begins with David returning to his hometown to go to a family gathering.
I rang the doorbell of my grandmother's house, and then I remembered to pull off my wedding ring. I slipped it into my pocket, and I was someone else, an actor playing a fictional version of me. When I got married, my family made a decision for my grandmother. They agreed that everyone could know about my husband except her. They feared she would disown me, excoriate my father, blame my mother. My grandmother was from the old country, and she lived by old rules. My grandmother sat in the same spot on the couch where I've always known her to be. But now she was breathing through a tube connected to an oxygen tank. "David," she called out, raising her arms. "I'm dying," she said. My grandmother has been dying for 20 years. On that day, however, her shrunken body declared that truth in a way her voice never could. "I love you, Nana," I said. "Cancer," she said. "I love you," I replied. Our relationship had been built on decades of 2-minute conversations about her most recent aches and pains. I knew little about her past other than that she'd had a tumultuous life in Palestine, being married off to an older man and becoming a mother while in her teens. By the time political turmoil and family infighting forced her to flee to the United States, she'd given birth to 3 more children and lost her husband. "Why did you move up there?" she asked. "Why leave your family?" "I like Portland," I said. I couldn't tell her about my husband and me watching the rain from our porch, or our brisk hikes to see sweeping views of the Columbia River. She'd never see the wedding photos of us under the misty St. John's Bridge. "Are you living with anyone?" The question wasn't prying, merely curious. What could I tell her? "Yes, Nana, I'm living with the love of my life." I looked at my aunt, the only other person listening in. "Am I living with anyone?" I asked. I didn't know if there had been efforts to coordinate this fiction. Had anyone bothered to give me a backstory? "A roommate," I said. The word reverberated like an incantation, as if I had summoned the ghosts of every gay person who had ever been forced to use this pretense, a word to protect and erase. For decades, I hid my feelings from the world and suffocated them into nothingness. From the moment I accepted my husband's proposal of marriage, I promised I would never forsake him. Our engagement was not only a promise to him, it was a promise to myself that I would never hide again. But here I was. "Are you happy?" my grandmother asked. "I love you, Nana," I said. But now I was speaking to someone else, to the man who did not exist in her house. That afternoon, my mother had stayed home with my husband to help him feel less alone. To help us all pretend this was not a charade. They were watching a movie, or making lunch, or chatting about his family and the reasons for his estrangement from them. I reached into my pocket and felt the smooth contours of my wedding ring. In the darkness of my pocket, my finger slipped through it. Whatever he was doing, I knew he was doing it with his ring on.
It turns out that wasn't the last time David saw his grandmother. I talked to him about their final visit after the break. David Califf, thank you so much for reading your essay.
Thanks for having me.
So your Modern Love essay was about a visit to your grandmother's house in California that you thought would be the last time you ever saw her alive, but you actually saw her one more time. Can you tell me about that final visit?
Yeah, I was traveling down to Los Angeles for the holidays, and she was not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
And so my husband and I drove down from Portland to Los Angeles to see her so that I could visit with her one last time.
It's interesting because in your essay, you thought that'd be your last time talking to your grandmother. So in a way, perhaps it sounds like you said everything you needed to say. So this truly final visit, this visit to the hospital, I don't know, did you feel like, what was different about it? You'd said what you needed to say, so what was left?
Yeah, there really wasn't much left. But the second I walked in and the second she saw me, she recognized me and said, "David." And I came over and took her hand and she took my hand. And we just sat there for a moment.
You drove to the hospital with Constantino, with your husband. Where was he during all this when you were in the room holding your grandma's hand?
Constantino waited for me in the car. So he was
just outside.
He was just outside. Yeah. I think even for just a split second entertained the idea of bringing him in. But I think if I brought him in the room, I would either have to tell her who he was. And as someone who was clearly ailing at the time, that felt maybe like a cruel thing to do, to give her something difficult to wrestle with. And it was either that or lie about who he was. And I'm over lying.
Mm-hmm. How did you feel as you left the hospital?
I felt sad. I think part of me was grieving a little bit, not just losing her, but also a bit of sadness about the limits of our relationship and how it was a smaller, more superficial relationship than I would have wanted. I think if there was any other emotion, there was a bit of relief, and one, relief for her because she'd been in pain for many years. Relief for me because she was the last person on earth who I had agreed to perpetuate a lie for. And so I knew once she had passed that I could 100% fully, truly be myself in the world. And there was no one on earth who I needed to pretend to.
You spoke at your grandmother's funeral. What did you talk about in your eulogy?
Yeah. So my folks had asked a few of the grandchildren to share a memory of their grandmother. And my sister and my cousin agreed. I declined, and they asked again, and I declined again. But
you're kind of laughing, but I feel like that's a kind of uncomfortable thing. They asked you and you said no. Tell me about why you reacted that way.
Yeah, well, I almost took offense to them even asking me because I had literally wrote a column in the New York Times about my distant and almost estranged relationship with my grandmother. And they had read it. And then they come to me and say, "Hey, would you share a memory of your grandmother?" And One of the original reasons that I declined was because I couldn't think of a good memory to share. We had had a lifetime of such short, superficial conversations. And so when I agreed to speak, I decided I would share about the last time I saw her at the hospital. And that was meaningful because I felt like we did have a moment there. And it was meaningful because the love of my life, the most important person to me, was outside in a parking lot. She never fully saw me, and I never fully saw her. And that's okay, that we still loved each other because she was my grandmother, I was her grandson, and we loved each other because of that. And maybe that's enough.
I mean, I've never heard a eulogy like that ever before. But I imagine that if I haven't heard a eulogy like that, a lot of folks in the room also had not heard a eulogy as honest as that. What were the reactions from your family after you gave this speech?
I was very happy with what I said, but not everyone was. And in particular, my dad, who is a very kind and gentle man, was furious, and he felt like the memory disrespected my grandmother. And to him, my eulogy was selfish. I think he felt like I made it about me rather than just sharing something bright and cheery about her. And for me, it was important to accurately characterize the nature of our relationship. And I, at least for my part, never felt like I was vulnerable with her. And when you aren't vulnerable with someone, you're strangers.
I'm thinking about how there were all these opportunities you had to introduce Constantino to your grandmother. And for so many reasons, every time you decided that it wasn't the right time. But I want to know, like, in an alternate world where you had introduced the two of them, what would you have wanted your grandma to know about Constantino, to know about your husband?
What I'd want her to know is that I'm loved and I am complete. And she was always concerned about us getting married. So there's this part of her that always wanted us to be complete through the creation of family. And so I feel like if there was some way in which I could get her to accept and understand that he is family, that she would be able to accept that and she would be able to be happy for me.
David, thank you so much for sharing your memories of your grandma with me. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
You can find a link to David Califf's full Modern Love essay in our show notes. Modern Love is produced by Julia Botero, Christina Josa, and Hans Butow. It's edited by Sarah Saracen. Our executive producer is Jen Poyant. This episode was mixed by Rowan Nemisto, and our show was recorded by Maddie Masiello. The Modern Love theme music is by Dan Powell. Original music by Marian Lozano and Dan Powell. Digital production by Nell Galogli. The Modern Love column is edited by Daniel Jones. Mia Lee is the editor of Modern Love Projects. I'm Anna Martin. Thanks for listening.